Okay, hello, welcome to the channel. My name is Victor. So we're going to be going through the CompTIA Security Plus exam guide. Okay, if you check the curriculum, you have about core 5 objectives: attack, threats, and vulnerabilities, architecture and design, implementation, operations and incident response, and also governance, risks, and compliance. Amongst the 5 of them, implementation is very critical, it's very key. It's taking 25% of the exam content. And of course, what is expected of you. Earlier on in earlier certifications by CompTIA with respect to S+, it was also heavy on implementation. The objectives was really, how do we understand, how do we have the knowledge, how do we know what to do and what not to do, how do we kind of have most of those insights with respect to security components. But here now, it's heavy on how do we solve problems. It's heavy on how do we make sure that we be able to implement all of those things that we have designed, all of those things that we've architected, all of those things that we've laid out, all of those things that we've planned. So I'm going to be looking at this guide. This is the that's the Security Plus exam, 601. Depending on when you're going to be listening to this presentation, you have 601, you have 701 starting up in the next 3-4 months. Okay, so let's look at the very first one. So understand that the exam has just a little brief about the exam. It's 90 minutes. Your pass score is 750, and it's you need you're going to get about 90 questions. Okay, so let's start from the very basics. So we're going to be looking at the domains, like I said: attack, threats, vulnerabilities. We're also going to look at architecture and design, and also going to look at implementation, operations, and incident response. And we start looking at compliance, risks, and governance. So, and this is where entry levels area where newbies can actually start. This is not so technical, right? Even this fourth knowledge area, not so technical. Here you have 14% and 16%. Okay, so let's look at some of the foundations of information security. Now, understand that the goal of the curriculum is to aid a starter to understand what are attacks, what are threats, what are vulnerabilities, that is susceptibility to attacks, what are flaws. Then how do we architect? How do we design? How do we create a system to make sure that we have what we call the elements of information security inherent in the organization? How do we ensure that? Then, of course, in 3, we're saying, how do we implement? Then, of course, in 4, we're saying operations. Because you see, most of the times to provide security is not a one-man show, it's not a two-man show. So you're going to have, if it's a network system, you're going to have who is going to implement system, who is going to procure, who is going to manage, who is going to train, who is going to liaise with third party. So it's typically an operation. If it's for cloud, if it's for software development, it's a whole lot of operations, from development to the design, to launching, to ensuring continuous integration, continuous development. All of these things are operations. And when we have an incident, so to say, how do we respond to it? Then, of course, in the last one, we'll look at those basics in risks and compliance. So let's look at the foundation to cybersecurity. So we'll start talking about overview of security. And of course, don't forget that you need to score at about, 750 for your exam. 750 on the scale of 100 to 900 for your exam for you to pass. So give or take, you should be, if you're using a test dumps, you want to be scoring at least 80, 90 or 85, 90% to be sure that you are prepared for the exam. So information security is the act of protecting data, and information from unauthorized access, unlawful modification and disruption, disclosure, corruption, and destruction. Now, there are some keywords said that sums up to what we call the CIA: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, I will say unauthorized access. So this is synonymous to the definition of what hacking is. So hacking is where you have unauthorized access to information. That information can be on the cloud, it can be on the desktop, it can be on the mobile, it can be on the website, it can be on any IT infrastructure. Once there is access that is not supposed to be, there's a breach, especially when information is stolen, or when there's unlawful modification. When we talk about unlawful modification, we're talking about an integrity issue here. Integrity is where we want to ensure that people cannot tamper, people cannot pilfer, people cannot change, people cannot modify. Those are synonymous words you can use for integrity when you're trying to ensure. So there's some of the job of a cybersecurity expert actually to ensure that, okay, if we have a website, can we ensure that people cannot tamper with, or like somebody, for instance, is trying to get into an examination system for a school and want to change results from F to A? That's an unlawful modification. Or somebody has a desktop or a laptop and the person wants to change the file that has a list of persons for promotion, for instance. How do we ensure that? So your job is typically going to ensure that those things shouldn't happen. Then, of course, we say disclosure. So that's where confidentiality is. So how do we ensure that only persons that should see something should actually have access to that? And of course, corruption where it's not possible that we can't see it, but we cannot make use of it. And destruction is where in operations, we talk about business continuity. How do we ensure that even when there's destruction, even when there's an anomaly, can we ensure continuous use of IT systems? So information security covers quite a lot. So in summary, we can say we want to make sure that there is business continuity. Anything that is going to hamper on our continuous processes, we want to make sure that we don't allow that to happen. So also is an act of protecting the system that holds and processes our critical data. You should know that data has several stages. Data goes through several stages, right from data being stored, data being processed, data being collected, data being transferred. These are like the life cycle of data. Life cycle of data. So I think I have something nice here. So data lifecycle refers to the different stages a unit of data undergoes from initial collection to when it's no longer considered useful and deleted. By regulation, when we start learning about governance, risks, compliance, that's when you get to understand that data has in its life cycle, by regulations, depending on the standard, either in banking or in tech or in healthcare, they are acceptable number of years that you can allow, or you can keep, or you should keep data. You cannot just say, okay, I collected so data, I'm deleting it. Or you build into your systems and somebody is able to like remove data, somebody is able to delete data, somebody is able to it's just like if you go to your bank, a very classical example, or you go to your telecom provider and you tell them to give you information about your line that happened 5 years ago, they're going to bring it out. Now, it's only when it exceeds, most of the times, some regulation, depending on the body, 7 years, 5 years, 6 months, 2 years, depending on where we can hold it, where we can archive it, and when we cannot trash it. But even trashing most of the times in different industries is not an option. The best that can happen most of the times is archiving. Your data has been archived for no repudiation's sake. You're going to learn that later on as one of the elements of information security. You don't want a situation whereby somebody is going to deny having received an information, or somebody cannot deny having given out information. So how do we tell that if that data is being destroyed? How do we tell that if that data is not at least archived? If you start learning cloud computing, of course, which will, if you take cybersecurity to the cloud, that's where you start learning about life cycle of data storage, where we don't put the data in the format that we just need it now. We can put it in the format where we archive it. And it's now going to take a longer time for us to retrieve, maybe some few hours. Then we pay less for such kind of storage. Okay, so I think I was trying to refer to this. So you have, number one is generation. You generate the data. You collect the data. You process the data. You store the data. You manage the data. You even analyze it. That's where data analysis comes in. You visualize it, you interpret it. This is the life cycle of data. I would say that this relates very much to information security in the sense that we want to ensure that at every stage of this process that we can protect. We can ensure there's no disruption, there's no pilfering, there's no tampering of data, right? So ask yourself as a security expert or security analyst, what's your job? Your job is, how do we ensure that here, once that is collected, we ensure CIA, we ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We ensure non-repudiation. We ensure authentication. We want to authenticate what we are collecting, what we are not collecting. While we are processing, while we are storing it, can we ensure those 5 elements of information security? When you use procedures, use processes, use softwares, use platforms, use people. Normally we say technology, process, and one other thing, if I remember. Use those things to ensure that, for instance, if you're using software, how do I ensure that while storing data, people cannot steal it? So that's where folder lock, that's where file lock comes in, that's where password controlled storage is, and several other stages of the life cycle of data. So the act of protecting the system that holds and processes our critical data. Then the CIA trade I was talking about, confidentiality, integrity, availability. So this is the fulcrum at which every other area in cybersecurity is based on. Understand that as a security analyst, your job is to ensure that there's confidentiality. How do we make sure that information has not been disclosed to unauthorized people? So can you use a software to do that? Can you use a procedure, a process, like a guideline to do that? Can you use the software, I mean technology? Can you use a process? Can you use people? How do you ensure all of that? Okay, then integrity. How do you ensure that data cannot be modified, data cannot be altered? And of course, in availability, how do we ensure that we store, while we're storing, while we're accessing, this data is protected at all times? Then there's a very important concept you need to understand when it comes to authentication. Authentication has to do with how do we prove, how do we ensure, how do we confirm that this person that says he owns this data, actually he owns it. That's authentication. So you see something like in the bank, you say sign here, sign again. You see something like enter your username, enter your password, enter it again. Or enter your password and we're going to send you an OTP, then you are going to put in that number or that text to go from the OTP, then we confirm that it is you. That's authentication. You're going to say something like enter your password, then put in your fingerprint. We want to confirm, we want to ensure. Or things like, okay, no, you are not from this zone. Your IP address does not correspond to the geographical area we want people to access this particular website. That is authentication. We want to confirm, we want to prove, we want to kind of establish the person's identity. So it comes in several means. At times you hear things like normal authentication, then 2-step authentication, then you can have 3, then you can have 4, you can have multiples. The idea is that you want to have what we call defense in depth. You want to have layers of security because your security is as good as how much layers you have. That's why you see in physical security, for instance, you're going to have a gate, you're going to have access control, you're going to have CCTV, you're going to have man guards, you're going to have dogs, you're going to have a barbed wire or a bar, an iron bar. You're going to have a logbook, a sign in and sign out. You're going to have several layers. All this is to authenticate, all this is to confirm, so that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 5 years ahead thereabout, or 2 days going forward, we can go back and confirm. So it comes in several means. It comes in something you know, typically your username, your password, something you are, that is who you are. It can be maybe your role, then something you have, typically something physical. It can be your swipe card, it can be your badge, it can be your, let's say, token. Then something you do, it can be your actions, it can be what you now, where you are navigating on the platform and the rest. Then somewhere you are, it can be your geographical location, like I told you. There are some IT systems that you have, websites and networks, that if you're not coming from a particular IP address, you cannot access them. It then means that these IP addresses are whitelisted, then the other IP addresses are blacklisted. So one way to bypass it is to, if you can spoof, if you can clone an IP address within that geographical location, or if you can use what we call the virtual private network to try to access it. These are the different ways you can do authentication. Then the next AAA of security is what? Authorization. Now, it's normally you authenticate, you authorize, and you account. When you authorize, you're trying to say anybody that you have granted access to the platform I mean a mobile app, a website, a network, a cloud application, a mobile phone, a tablet, an IT system, it can be anything. So you have to open up your mind, because information security is applied to several areas. That's why one of the things I would normally advise students is that if you want to do InfoSec, you should make sure that you have some background in tech. You should have some background in either networking, in cloud, at least you should be doing something in tech. When you start learning cybersecurity, you're not trying to say, okay, I want to protect that thing that I can create or somebody else have created. It's like a builder that is asked to fix a building, and he doesn't even know how the building was set up, or he cannot even set up one, but you're asking him to come and fix. You're trying to tell him to come and secure. You're trying to tell him to come and like advise on how we can make that system better. So it's like you shooting the gun, or like going ahead of yourself. So authorization is, I have authenticated, I have allowed the person to gain access. Now, in the next step, I need to now authorize what this person can do and what this person shouldn't do, right? So in authorization, you have rules, you have permissions. That's how you can come into a website, for instance, and you are limited by what you can do. Then somebody else can be authenticated and get access to a system, and the person can do a wider range of items or things. Then you have a third person that's a super admin, is going to have access to a website, and it can do far more things. It can even delete a person. Same thing applies to a typical system that you have. You can have levels of users. You can have a normal user. You can have guest user. You can have normal user. You can have, what was it called? A super user or administrator. A guest user cannot even create an account, right? On a PC. But a user can create an account on a PC, most likely, but might not be able to create an administrator. Whereas an administrator is able to create all of these other accounts. So in authorization, we tell what can you do. A guest user might not be able to install a software depending on what the configuration is, but an admin can install a software. Take, for instance, on a web application, a user will be able to maybe log in, buy something, check out, but he can only see his own account. But an admin, when he logs in, when he's authenticated, he will be able to see what every other person is doing on the platform. Now, the last thing is tracking. We want to track. We want to try to understand what has happened. If we allow somebody to gain access, what is the person doing? That's what we want to be able to account for. So we call it the AAA, the authentication, the authorization, and the accounting. In accounting, here, what we're trying to do, we're trying to track data. We're trying to see network app usage. Here, we want to ensure non-repudiation. Non-repudiation is where you want to make sure that somebody cannot deny having sent a message, or the person cannot deny having received the message. WhatsApp platforms, tech platforms, softwares, applications, a logbook, a CCTV camera is a classical example of how you can ensure accounting, how you can ensure non-repudiation. You want to have a proof that an action has been taken. If you send a person a WhatsApp message, for instance, if you see a single tick, that means it has gone off from your end. If you see a double tick, it then means the person have internet facility on his or her phone or tablet. If you see a double tick with a green stuff, you understand that the person have actually read. Now, some people do what we call hide read messages and whatever, but it's just like a gimmick. Because if you are available, if you've seen a double tick for the past 2-3 days, just know that the person has read the message. The person is just typically deceiving him or herself that, oh, I have not read it. Then you have other platforms that can help you ensure accounting. So the game now is, as a security analyst, your job is, how do I implement accounting? How do I implement non-repudiation in a software, in a mobile app, in a network, on my PC, on IT systems? So going back to what I said earlier on, you're going to be using procedures, you're going to be using people management, you're going to be using technology, you're going to be using softwares and hardwares. Okay, let's look at the concept of security threats, malware. So malware is the umbrella word for malicious software. So anything that causes system malfunction, it's what you call a security threat. So malware is a short form of malicious software. So unauthorized access. So this occurs when there's access to computer resources and data occurs without consent of the owner. Data can be stolen, data can be seen. Another example is when you have system failure, when you have computer crash, or a particular application fails, you cannot load it again, or you cannot see, you cannot set up configurations on your PC. This is an example of signs of a security threat. Then we have social engineering. Now, social engineering is amongst one of the fourth stage of hacking. Now, when we say hacking, we say unauthorized access. Now, and most of the times the goal is to cause system malfunction. Now, how do you do that? It's normally a 5-step process. So the first process is normally, let me see if I can write this down. So the first process is normally what we call reconnaissance, right? Reconnaissance. Second stage is scanning, gaining access, maintaining access, then clearing tracks. So if somebody asks you, how do I hack? Tell the person, the first thing I do is I do reconnaissance. Second thing I do is I do scanning. Third thing I do gaining access. Third thing I do is maintaining access. The last thing I do is clearing tracks. Now, where does social engineering comes in? So social engineering comes in at the first stage. Now, if any hack is to happen, either within an enterprise or an SME or a system, a network, a cloud application, a web application, a mobile application, if there's any hack, if any hack is to happen, or let me put it simply, if a thief is to go to somewhere to steal, the first thing the thief does is to do what? Is to do reconnaissance, is to do spying, is to try to gather intelligence. So this is where intelligence acquisition comes in. This is where OSINT, open source intelligence, comes in. By the way, there are several ways to do intelligence gathering. You have OSINT, you have MASINT, you have several of them. In my spare time, I'm going to do like a record for that. Now, but just understand that you have several ways that reconnaissance can be conducted. Amongst them is social engineering. So if I write social engineering here, next thing I should be writing is whois. Next thing I should be writing is website footprinting. Next thing I should be writing is what else again? Google search. There are about 10 of them. Now, after that stage, I should have gotten what we call peripheral basic information about the target. Either you are doing this to protect or you are doing this to do a pen testing. Now, the second thing is going to be scanning. So this is where you get things like usernames, not necessarily password at this stage, because normally it's not just a hit, bam, you are in. It always follows a methodology, follows a process. So once you have things like target IP address, name, technology builds, and several other basics, then the next thing is to scan. At scanning stage, and at times this can be synonymous to enumeration. So at enumeration, you want to get things like usernames, things like shares, at least the use base for you to know. Because if you are to get into a system, you need username first before you talk about password. So at this stage, this is where we're talking about usernames. Here it's like saying, okay, what do I want to even hack? What technology is it built on? Because by the time we start talking about vulnerability assessment is you trying to check how a system is susceptible to a hack. What are the loopholes? What are the flaws you have in a particular system? Then you cannot tell how a system is flawed if you at least don't even understand the system. Take, for instance, if you are setting up a network, if a network is built in a certain way, that exposes to some certain types of vulnerabilities. Take, for instance, password systems you have for networks. You have what we call WEP, you have that's web. I think you have even web 1, web 2. Then you have WPA. Then you have WPA1. You have 2. I think you have 3 now. These are different ways networks, the password is encrypted. How you hack web 1, 2 is different from how you hack, what's it called? WPA1 or 2. Why? These are different versions of how the password systems for networks are done. Same thing. How you're going to hack a PHP version 5 is not how you're going to hack PHP version 8. Because the vulnerabilities in 5 have been patched in 8. Doesn't mean that you cannot have vulnerability in 8. Same thing. How you hack a Windows XP is not how you hack a Windows 7 or how you get into a Windows 10 or Windows 11. Why? As the versions get upgraded, those vulnerabilities that are discovered are patched, are secured. So the very first thing you want to do is to first understand the system. That's what you do in reconnaissance. Once you understand the system, you understand the version, you understand the technology that it's built on, you understand all of those things, that's when you can now start saying, okay, let me start looking at enumeration. Then, of course, you now have gaining access. Gaining access is where you now do password hacking. It's where you now do steganography. Steganography is synonymous to hiding files. So that's where you have also clearing tracks in gaining access. That's where you also have executing application. Executing application, right? So you have, I think, 2 others. So of course, maintaining access is where you start saying, okay, how do I do a RAT? How do I do a remote access tool? How am I able to still gain access even when you have access? Then of course, clearing tracks. So one way you can also understand persons that are not grounded on methodologies for hacking is that they do most of the things they do without clearing tracks. And clearing tracks gives the inroad to reconnaissance, right? Clearing tracks give the inroad to reconnaissance. So it's after it's what you have as tracks of an incident that is going to be used for reconnaissance. So what it means is that if a site or an application is hacked, is the trace backs, the files, what are the things that are left, the tools that are used for the hack, the hacker used and whatever. That's what you now use to pick up and do forensics. Pick up and you now do OSINT, you pick up, you now do Google search, you pick up, you now do WHOIS, you pick up the IP address, you check up to now gain understanding. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make is that social engineering is amongst the first very peripheral areas in the hacking process. So it comes very, very first. So what is it? Act of manipulating users into revealing information, especially confidential information, or performing other detrimental actions. And there are different ways that can be done. So that's where you have shoulder surfing. So if I want to explain social engineering and say, how can it be done? So you say shoulder surfing is dropping, dumpster diving, tailgating, and several other ways. So these are the ways that people fishing also. And fishing can be spear fishing, it can be fishing, it can be several other ways. So these are the ways that people can be deceived to do stuff that they're not supposed to do. So shoulder surfing is, or to collect confidential information. Shoulder surfing is when somebody looks over another person's shoulder, right? You see that in ATMs, picking people's password, trying to see the patterns. Eavesdropping is ear, where somebody's trying to listen to conversations, especially for rooms that are not soundproof. Rooms that are not soundproof. Dumpster diving is where people go to do reconnaissance. People go to get basic information like account numbers, statements of account, confidential information, compliance data, get like competitive intelligence by looking at the dustbin, the dumps of companies, individuals. I know you must have watched in films where you see somebody looking out for information on a bin. So can I see account number? Can I see account statement? It lays credence to the fact that people will not hack what is not important. People are not going to go for what does not make hack value. So hack value has to do with, is it worth it? Is it worth my time? Is it worth energy? That's why at times I will normally tell students will argue and say, okay, if you compare iOS and Android, if you compare Windows and iOS, which one is more safe? Which one? So students will keep shouting, oh, it's iOS, it's Mac. It's not that. It's hack value. So what's the quantum? What's the number of persons that are using each of these platforms? So if, as a fisherman, if I throw in my net, where is it likely, where's the likelihood that I'm going to catch enough of fish? So you have it where you have more usage. So that doesn't mean that you have more security measures on these other platforms. It's just a game of numbers. So how do we mitigate some of these threats? So we have physical controls. Now, ask yourself, what is the business of a security analyst? What does it have to do with surveillance cameras? Why is he going to be disturbing himself about access control, swipe cards, RFC card, NFC cards, security guards, alert system? Why does he need to have that knowledge? Because no matter how secured let's say you have a server now in a physical location, is hosting data worth $1 billion. That doesn't make any sense. It amounts to nothing. Or you have a laptop that is worth $1 million. It has data worth billions of data, hosts, intellectual property, patents, rights, and whatever. It makes no sense. If the physical location where these items are, people can easily have access to them. So if you have $1 billion worth laptop in terms of content data, and somebody can pick it up, and you don't have a CCTV camera that tells who did it, when, how does the person look like, is the person, what color of shirt is the person wearing at what time, you cannot even tell. You don't have access control systems. So it is very, very closely related. That's why it doesn't hurt to have very, very sound, even hands-on knowledge with respect to alarm systems, locks, surveillance cameras, CCTV systems, DVRs, NVRs, identification systems, security guards. So it tells when you are architecting, when you are planning, when you are designing your security controls for your IT systems, you understand what is actually happening with respect to physical controls. Then technical control. So we're saying that that's why you see some tech companies, for instance, they go into alarm systems, because if they need to build a data center, they build a data center, secure the data center. Ask yourself, how will that data center be secured? There's need for networks. There is need for access controls. There's need for CCTV systems. There's need for cloud backup. So all of these things go hand in hand, and it doesn't hurt having solid skill based knowledge in these areas. Then technical control. So we're saying that if we need to control systems, if we need to control IT systems, either cloud, web, network, applications, we can employ technology. Here we're employing physical systems, locks, guards, dogs, fence, swipe card, NFC cards. If you don't know what NFC cards are like, it's just like access control, right? Something that looks like this. So RFC, RFID, NFC, you just swipe it and you have access. You swipe it and you have access. That's what you call the NFC card. Right? You swipe it in and you are in. So this is what an NFC or an RFID card looks like. Some of them use Bluetooth. Some of them use, what's it called? Infrared. So aside ensuring physical controls through those means, you also want to have some technical control. This is where you're now employing technology. So that's where smart card encryption, ACLs, if you have a network, either physically or on the cloud, that's where intrusion detection systems comes in, either intrusion detection systems or intrusion prevention systems. We'll look at this later on in the course in more detail. Then network authentication. This is where you are implementing technical control. Then ask yourself, there's a third area, administrative control. Now, who is going to drive how we should do that? This is very synonymous to governance. We should tell how we should drive, what we should do, how we should do it, when should we do it, who is going to help us do it, when something happens, who should we call? That is administrative controls. So this is where policy, procedures, principles, plans, where they come in. So one of the lowest hanging fruits for a security analyst, if he's coming into organization, is to first create an information security policy document. So an adaptation to policy document is what you have in some companies as HR policy, dress policy, fire policy, different kinds of policy that guides how to do different things. So in tech, we talk about InfoSec policy. So what does an InfoSec policy looks like? An InfoSec policy is typically a document that tells how we should do tech. So if I say InfoSec policy, let's say banking, file type, PDF, I'm going to see a sample of what an InfoSec policy document for a bank looks like. General Small Finance Bank. So this is policy. So you're going to see things encompassing, okay, see what we just learned now. Confidentiality, integrity, availability. That is the goal. That is the core. Now, what is the scope of this policy? This policy applies to all employees, contractors, partners, interns, trainees working in JSF Bank, third-party service providers providing hosting service. In short, how do we do tech? Now, if you scan through the policy, ownership, who owns it, responsibility, policy exceptions, periodic review. I think when I have time, I'm going to do like a small, maybe 3 or 5 series training on how to set up information security policy documents, because it's one of the lowest hanging fruits as a security analyst. You cannot secure an enterprise, you cannot secure a network if there is first no information security policy document. An InfoSec policy is also going to include a network policy, an email policy, a website policy, right? An incident response policy. It's going to include several other types of policies if it's comprehensive enough, right? Right? So it addresses a lot of things. If it's email policy, for instance, who should create the email? When should we change policy? How do we do access control? Who is responsible for access control? And all of those details. So in administrative controls, we are trying to see how do we use policies, procedures, security awareness training to try to make sure that we have security in place. So these are the three most common types of controls we have in order to mitigate threats: physical controls, technical controls, and administrative controls. Now, for the very basics, types of hackers. So we say white, black, gray, blue, and elite. Of course, we have script kiddies. If you want to differentiate them, mostly you could differentiate them with respect to their goals. You can differentiate them with respect to, which is the same thing as their intent. In white, these are typically for corporate organizations that actually want hackers to like try to assess their systems and see if they can see some vulnerabilities. And of course, the goal is to now patch these vulnerabilities. Whereas for black attackers, the goal is still the same process, but now the goal is to cause the system malfunction, right? For us, for gray, hackers without any affiliation to a company who attempt to break into company's network but rigs the law by doing so. So this is either, this can also be, you can have disgruntled employees, you can have persons that have been in a place before, they don't have any affiliation, they don't have, you can also classify this in a way to persons trying to do bug bounty, right? Persons trying to see how to get into systems, they know the risks, but they might want to now maybe propose maybe an alternative to how to have a secured system. Like have blue hats attempt to break into network with permission of the company, but are not employed by the company. Of course, you have elite. They find exploit vulnerabilities before anyone does. There's this concept to talk about a zero-day hack. Now, anytime you hear the word zero-day hack, we are talking about a hack that is not known by the company. Now, it's actually a very difficult, especially for Fortune 100, Fortune 50, Fortune 500 companies. They actually need people to like, of course, they spend thousands and thousands, if not millions of dollars to protect their system. So for persons that are going to actually still try to get access to that, we call them elite hackers. And of course, script kiddies, who else, anybody else that is going to be using tools, using scripts to try to hack. Then learning a programming language in order to try to create your own script, either in Python or in any language, is a very good plus. So it takes you off this net and become any of the other type of hackers. Then let's look at advanced persistent threats. Now, another way we can also classify hackers is that we can look at how they act. We can look at what roles they play. So we have script kiddies, like I've explained this before now. They will have hackivists. These ones can be, and most of the times, they are synonymous to state-sponsored hackers, but at times they can be independent. Social change, that's why they're hacking. Political agenda, that's why they're hacking. Terrorism, so you have the left against the right. At times you have the West against Asia. At times you have Asia against the West. At times you have some countries against some other countries. At times to push for some certain kind of things. At times to push for rights, some certain kind of rights. It can be for rights against maybe violence, rights against human rights, rights against different kind of things. A very common one is anonymous. So they look at people that are downtrodden, people that cannot fight for themselves, and they try to hack government agencies, companies, to try to press home such kind of demands. Then, of course, you have organized crimes, where part of, at times, they explore the concept of botnet, where you have several persons trying to create a more sophisticated hack. At times, this can come in a way where you want to cause business discontinuity. Things like upload bombing. Upload bombing is where you have, take for instance, a form on a website See this form, for instance. I have get practice questions and exam. Name, last name, email, select exam country. Now, if this have a form or this have an option for me to upload a file, it can be an image, it can be a document. Now, if there is no input validation for that particular file, so that's why you have developers creating applications. Those ones don't have or don't write good queries to the database to request for files or to submit files. They have and they're very susceptible to upload bombing. So you say somebody should upload a CV or somebody should upload a file. That file is 5 MB. Now, if you restrict the type of file the person is uploading, if you restrict the size of the file the person is uploading, if you restrict when the person should upload the file, then you are going to actually be securing the system. So this is similar to what we call access control list, where what kind of access the person is going to have, you're actually restricting it, you're actually controlling it. So upload bombing is where there's no restriction to access. There's no restriction to what can be deposited, what can be submitted. And somebody is going to, let's say, upload far way more than this site can contain. Let's assume that this site can take, let's say 200 gig or a terabyte. And the person have a very swift and fast internet service, and the person uploads 100 gig, 100 gig, 100 gig, 100 gig. Whatever space that you have at the other end is going to be filled up, and you can no longer take in more forms. It can be a recruitment portal, and you've accounted for, let's say, 1,000 CVs in the space of 3 days. And if somebody, and those CVs should averagely be, let's say, 1 MB. If somebody comes and uploads thousands and thousands of gigs, of course, you have caused a malfunction there. So, or you can have a group of 50 people doing that, and they can, that is or they can try to put in traffic to this particular application. If it's meant to take, let's say 100 gigabytes in terms of speed traffic. Let me tell you how to calculate that. Calculate bandwidth. Let's say hosting. Now, okay, let's use this calculator. You should be able to use, when doing your architecting, when planning, how much person should be able to access a site for the application. Let's say I am expecting 100,000 persons to view a particular page and apply. We give leverage of a person can load this page, let's say 3 times. So we call it 30,000 per day, or let's say per month. Let's say the person comes the first day, is not successful, maybe at the second or third attempt or 1 attempt, he applies for the web or applies on the recruitment side and he's submitted. Now, my page size is roughly about 500 kilobytes, right? A redundancy of 2. Let me calculate. Okay, let me put 2 here and let me put 500 here. Let me use the default. Now, your bandwidth needs is going to be 0.091 megabits per second. Okay, I don't love the way this calculator does it. Let me look for another calculator. I want to get it in average as per a month. Okay, I think I love this one. I normally use this particular one. 500, okay. This is it, website bandwidth calculator. Page views 500, okay. Let's say per month, 500 kilobytes. Redundancy 2, let's calculate. So we will know how many gig hosting we should be buying. Okay, the actual need is this or this. So this is calculated and times per, I think 30, the number of seconds you have in 30 days. So you have 15 gig. It then means that if I have about 30,000 page views, as in it can be 30,000 persons view 100 times, but you can do the calculations. Views have to do with the number of pages loaded. So 30,000 divided by, let's say, 10,000 persons. It's like saying one person load the page 3 times. That's the page view. How many pages you viewed? So what it means is that you need at least 15 gig hosting for this web application. Once you exceed this, you're going to see something like this. Bandwidth exceeded on your website. So it's called a 509 error page. It looks like something like this. Your hosting provider is going to serve you this page because you have exceeded your bandwidth. And if you see this, all you need to do is to upgrade to the next bandwidth, and that is going to be taken care of. Now, in terms of cybersecurity ethical hacking, how does this play a role in architecting the web application in terms of security? We want to allow that we're going to have some botnets. We're going to have a group of malicious crime group that want to now try to send in much traffic than we can contain. Because if we have more than 30, if we have more than 10,000 persons load 3 pages, what it means is that our site will be down and people cannot access the site, people cannot use, people cannot apply. If it's a mission critical application, that means it's down. So a simple hack can be to flood traffic to a particular application far more than what the site can contain. So as security analyst, what is going to be your goal? What you want to do is you want to make sure you properly plan and have as much bandwidth in case you have such kind of attack. So advanced persistent threats, highly trained and funded group of hackers, often by nation states with covert and open source intelligence at their disposal. So these guys have a lot of funds at hand. They can use sophisticated tools. They can create a lot of tools to meet their goals. Now, let's talk about threat intelligence. So threat intelligence has to do with we gathering know-how. How does something happen? When did it happen? If I pick up a file now, can I get intelligence on this particular site? Let me say list of hacked websites. So these are a list of sites that have been hacked before. Let's open it and let's see if we can do some basic forensics. Okay, this lists it in a certain way. Okay, let me get a particular list. Just a moment. Okay, let me do something. Pirate B. Let me open this one. And let me do virus total. Scan. So I want to scan a particular website and see what kind of intelligence I can gather from that. So I'm picking up a site, right? I'm trying to get intelligence. So virus total is a tool that can analyze suspicious files and URLs to detect malware, automatically share them with security community. So when you talk about security community, now we're talking about different vendors that have softwares, that have applications, that have hardwares. How do they tell about that this particular file, this particular software, this particular whatever is malicious? They can only do that from intelligence. So security has gone beyond just, I'm going to be typing something, I'm going to get this, I'm going to scan this. No, it has moved to AI where intelligence is shared by maybe heuristics, and normally before we cannot detect and say, okay, this particular stuff is vulnerable, this particular stuff is vulnerable, right? So I'm trying to see if I can load this particular, good, so it has loaded. So I can scan a file, a URL, or I can search. So let me scan a URL, this particular site, and let me hit enter. Hit enter. So it's going to give me some intelligence about this particular site. So you see, it's saying malicious. 2 security vendors, like I said, it can be a vendor in terms of software, it can be hardware, it can be antivirus malware, it can be a SIEM platform, it can be anything. right? They actually, all of these vendors, they do a lot of intelligence gathering so that they can upload to their update server to tell their softwares, their hardwares to flag a particular URL, a particular file, a particular software that it is susceptible to a hack. Details. So the first submission was this time around, this is server, this is the SHA value for this particular file. I'll talk about, I think there's a digital forensic training on the channel. You can check that out. These are the links that where this particular URL is going to. So it could give you a lot of intelligence on that. So in terms of intelligence, timeliness is very important. Relevance, right? Accuracy, confidence level, right? Then proprietary. So who owns it, right? Is it free? Is it paid? Then of course, closed source, as in where is it coming from? Or is it open source? Is it going to be free? Is it going to be paid for? Then you have several databases. You have the US SAT, you have UK NCSC, you have AT&T Security, you have MISP. VirusTotal is just the one I looked at right now, right? Now you need to have some basic idea about open source intelligence gathering. I think on the channel, there's a module in digital forensics that I talked about open source intelligence gathering. So anytime you hear the word open source intelligence gathering, we're trying to say, okay, we are trying to gather, we're trying to get some know-how, but this know-how are publicly available. So it's not something hidden. It's not something we're going to pay for. It's garbage in, garbage out. It's as much information you have in that you're going to get out. So that's why you have different tricks to which you can actually get all of this information. There's even an open source intelligence framework, OSINT framework, and you have quite a lot of them. So I love this one. So it gives you different tools, different applications that you can use that. So if you want to get email address, if you want to get usernames, if you want to get IP address, if you want to gather intelligence about domain names, if you want to gather intelligence about an IP address, if you want to gather intelligence about telephone numbers, but don't forget, it's only going to be about the data that's available publicly. If that data is not available publicly, you cannot get that through open source intelligence gathering. So maybe one of these days, I'm going to do like a series on OSINT. So in the next series, we're going to start looking at, from slide 10, we're going to be looking at threat hunting.